Here's Odin back again. Good on you, Odin. Listen, one of the things that has been troubling an awful lot of people, and they've been asking us, they said, listen, give us some examples. You talked about the synoptic material, that the Quran, very similar to our synoptic gospels, that you have stories that are similar within the Quran, but obviously either written at a later date or written by different hands. Now, we don't have a difficulty with this in the New Testament because of the fact that we believe that they are written by different authors. We know that. We put the names of the authors out there. And we get accused of this all the time as Christians by the Muslims that see this, how can this be from Jesus? Who's Matthew, who's Mark, who's Luke, who's John? And our response is, well, that's a given. That is understood. They were there. They were witnesses, or they got it from the witnesses. That's why you get the same story, but four different perspectives. To us, that enhances the story because you're getting four different testimonies. Now, you're saying that the same thing exists in the Quran, and you're actually going to give some examples. They've been asking examples. Over to you. What are these examples that you've been giving us?
So I will speak about Guillaume D's work. Especially, so it's not my work, but as I already told your audience, I'm relying on very advanced scholars, and I'm making a sort of synthesis of what they did for the general public. And I've got here a very interesting example which is for me evidence that there were different authors, different scribes that were working on the Quranic text, and that they wrote it and rewrote it, added details, and so that there is evidence that there was an editing process and a writing process for the making of the Quranic text. Guillaume D, he wrote many articles in French and books also, but he also writes in English, and there is a very interesting article, you can find it on the web, which is Concepts and Methods in the Study of the Quran.
That's in English for those of us who have to speak English. Obviously, we don't understand. That's very nice. Thank you for that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I have taken two examples from this article, and I want to show to your audience in order to prove that the Quranic text has gone through an editing process. It is about, the first example is are the different narratives about the creation of Adam and Iblis in the Quran. We have variations that show us that there was an editing process. Mm-hmm. And there is also a very interesting discovery Guillaume D made. Actually, it was one of his students, Julien de Charneux, who made the discovery about the Mizan word in the beginning of Surah 55. So let's jump to the presentation. Let me share my screen. Okay, so by the way, if you hear some noise, I think it's one of my neighbors drilling his wall. So don't worry about the background noise.
It sounds like a cow mooing in the background.
He's drilling very hard on very tough concrete walls, but I'm hoping it will be done soon. So, but let's go back to the presentation of those variations in the Adam Iblis narrative. You find them in many different surahs. But here I have put together three different narratives that we find in Surah 2, Surah 38, and Surah 15. And we will see that we have differences, sort of discrepancies between the different stories. And I think those are proof, and I think Guillaume D also thinks those are proof of an editing process and a rewriting process. So in Surah 2, we have a very short passage, Surah 2, verse 34, about the prostration of the angels before Adam and the refusal of Iblis, which said, and when we said to the angels, prostrate before Adam, So they prostrated, except for Iblis. He refused, and he was arrogant and became of the disbelievers. And in Surah 38 and 15, we have different versions of this same story, and versions with added details. So, for example, in Surah 38, verse 71 and 15:28, the narrator has changed. It is not God anymore who speaks, but someone who said, when your Lord, instead of when we said to the angels. When your Lord said to the angels, I am going to create a human being from clay, and a detail which is absent from Surah 2. And in Surah 15, there is an added detail, which is the type of clay out of which the human being will be created. It is an altered black mud. And in Surah 15, in the previous verses, I don't remember the exact verses, but from number 20, I guess, it is there are details about this altered black mud. And other details that are absent from Surah 2. So when I have proportioned him and breathed into him of my soul, the same in Surah 15. And then we have almost the same as in Surah 2, prostrate before Adam, then fall down to him in prostration, fall down and the same. So the angel prostrated, the same, all of them entirely, except Iblis. And here in Surah 15, we have something from Surah 2, he refused, which is absent from Surah 38, and he refused to be with those prostrated. Surah 15 adds another detail that is not in Surah 2 to explain what Iblis refused. He refused to be with those who prostrated. And he refused, so, and Adam Iblis became arrogant and became among the disbelievers, kafirun. And in the following parts of Surah 38 and Surah 15, the story goes on, but there is nothing in Surah 2 about those new details. And a bit like before, we have different versions of the same story with details in one version that are not in the other, and the other way around. For example, the arrogance of Iblis is pointed out in Surah 38, but not in Surah 15. Here we see it in Surah 38, verse 75, where you arrogant then, and were you already among the haughty. Surah 15 keeps on with the altered black mud story, which we still do not find in Surah 38. I am better than him. You created me from fire and created him from clay. And in Surah 15, it's out of clay from an altered black mud. A thing which is very remarkable in Surah 15, the paradise is not named. There is a pronoun for it. In Surah 38, verse 77, then get out of paradise. And in Surah 15, then get out of it. As if the scribe kind of already knew that it was about the paradise, but forgot to mention it. And so on. We see almost exactly the same narrative in Surah 38 and in Surah 15, 38, 78 to 81, and in Surah 15, verse 35 to 38, it is the same narrative, almost the same. Then a detail in Surah 15 that is not in Surah 38, and thereafter, almost the same narrative with some added details in Surah 38. So we see that we have three stories that are very close, at least in for the beginning of the story, it's almost the same in Surah 2, in Surah 38, in Surah 15. But we see that the scribes added details, and I think the best hypothesis for those variations in the narrative is that it was an editing process, a rewriting process. One could also put forth the hypothesis that it was the preacher who changed his narrative and who preached one day something like Surah 2, the other day something like Surah 38, and the day after something like Surah 15. But all in all, it really looks like a writing process, because it is, for some parts, they are exactly the same, like they were copied and pasted, like with the computer software. Those are exactly the same verses. For example, 78 and 38, 78 and 15, 35. So I think it is an editing process and a writing process, much more than a preaching or an oracular process.
Well, this is good. This is excellent. Thanks, Odon. This proves that there has been a reworking, that this proves that a story, a simple story, Adam and Iblis, as you put down there in chapter 2, in chapter 38, and chapter 15, so many differences between the different narrations, proving that there are either three different authors, which no Muslim will accept. No Muslim will accept that right there. Or there has been a change, a manipulation in both cases of 38 and 15, additions, because there's a lot more in chapter 38 and chapter 15 than you have in chapter 2. So they've added to it, they've accreted it. And even they don't agree, because they have variations with between 38 and 15. So that the conclusion is very simple. Either this is three different authors who are looking at a story that has been passed down to them from earlier, and they are now just putting their own imprints on it. They're putting their own take on it, which is what we know and we're quite familiar with and we're very comfortable with in the New Testament Synoptic Gospels, because we know that there are four different writings of the same events. Sometimes one embellishes one says more about that event than the other. Sometimes one author writes in a completely different style than the other. That's what you would expect from four different authors, but you don't expect that from the Quran. No, the Quran is eternal. There is no authorship. You cannot have human manipulation. You cannot have accretions and deletion. It must be exactly the same story, word for word, idea for idea, sentence for sentence. And yet you're just showing three examples of where Guillaume D has found three different stories of the same story, but three different ways of saying the same story, proving a later accretion, or in this case, proving that there was an adaptation. Good stuff.
Jay, I could add a sort of cherry on top of the cake. This is a French expression, the cherry on the cake.
We have it in English as well. Give us a cherry on top of the cake.
You have the same.
We have the same. We got it from you guys. Thank you for that, because you're the one who
Jay, this story about the creation of Adam and the prostration of the angels and this Iblis thing. We find sources of this in the Jewish Christian tradition, the former Jewish Christian tradition, in a book which is called The Life of Adam and Eve. And again, we already discussed it, but it's all about the context. You see, this story was in the Jewish Christian context of the 7th century in the Middle East. And we find it in the Quran, and we find different variations, added details about this story. And so one can only come to the conclusion that the Quran is a text that has been made out of the religious 7th century religious context, and it has gone through an editing process, a writing and rewriting process.
Brilliant. So now we even know where the source is, which is what we've been always saying. They're all coming from an antecedent. In this case, it is an antecedent that comes from the 7th century, from the Jewish Christian milieu. It comes out of that. They lifted it out by the 8th and 9th century when they're putting the Quran together. You have not only different authors, but you can't even agree on what kind of clay they're talking about. One says clay, the other says black mud. So even that shows human intervention. That shows that there has been an addition by later scribes who then want to write in their own viewpoints or their own additions into this text. Well done. Thank you for this. Good example. And I understand you have another example. We'll be doing that one next. Thanks so much, Odin.
Exactly.
This is Jay and Odin. Over and out.